Hello and welcome back to the Battle Camp. I'm sure you know the face that sat right next to me, but if you're not, you will definitely know the voice. This over here is James Lynch. Hello, James. How you doing?
Doing awesome. What a nice introduction that is. Thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm getting better at introductions, to be honest, because that's the thing. I struggle with introductions and outros, but I'm trying to coach myself to be a little bit better.
I give that an A plus. I'll give that an A plus. That was good.
Too kind, James. You're too kind. So I'll tell you, you're in Canada, right?
I am in Vancouver, Canada, which is actually getting snow. A lot of listen, I want to throw this out there for a lot of people who don't know much about Canada, but like everyone thinks everywhere in Canada is cold. That's not true. Where I live in Vancouver, it's more actually like the UK where we get a lot of rain. We get, some warm summers, but it doesn't typically snow. But you caught me on a rare day where it just actually snowed over the weekend. But the snow is going to be gone by the end of today. That's just basically how it works.
Yeah, we've been having a bit of snow recently as well. So even more alike the UK and Canada. I've actually got family in Vancouver. I've got family in Port Alberni. Don't know if you've heard of this. Like
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, I know where Port Alberni is. I'm just on. I'm closer to the U.S. border, so I'm like 5 minutes away from Washington State. That's where I live.
Okay,
So
cool.
kind of on the south end of Vancouver.
I've been around that area, so yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But we're not here to talk about Vancouver. We're here to talk
Nope.
about mixed martial arts. So obviously, like I mentioned to you kind of off here, what I kind of really want to cover off with yourself is the welterweight division, because to me, it's really fascinating how things have played out since the Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns fight over the weekend. But before we talk about what's happening next, let's talk about what has already happened. So Kamaru Usman against Gilbert Burns. Give me your thought. What was your prediction going into the fight, and give me your thoughts of the actual fight?
I had Usman winning. I thought he would win a decision, though, to be honest. And it's not necessarily anything to do with Gilbert being like a durable opponent. I just felt like, I think Usman would just, I didn't see him, finishing a Gilbert Burns just because Burns has really good stand up. We saw him knock out Damian Maia. We've seen him, really come into his own with his striking. So I felt like Usman would probably play more of a wrestling game. But the fact that he was able to go in there and finish, Burns was exceeded my expectations. I always had Usman winning. I always felt like, Burns had an impressive run. He hadn't had that many fights at welterweight, and I felt like we hadn't seen enough from him because, yeah, you can knock out Damian Maia, great, A+ performance, but, he didn't fight anyone like a Wonder Boy or like, some of those like bigger names in that division. So I felt like, it was really tough to gauge where he was at. Whereas Usman, you know what you're going to get. The guy's never lost in the UFC, just outstanding performances. And, the fact is he's getting better every fight. And I think him actually going to Elevation Fight Team has actually improved his game because he's getting out of, sort of the same coaching he's had. He's learning something completely different. So, yeah, to answer your question in the long-winded answers, I did pick Usman, but I didn't think he'd finish it that quickly.
Yeah, I like details because I want to kind of get into the weeds a little bit with what you've just said. So
Sure.
I'm much the same as yourself. So my prediction before the fight was an Usman points decision victory, but I felt like he'd be, like you say, clinching with him a lot and kind of pushing him up against the fence and using the fence to his advantage. What we saw from Usman is him getting clipped early on in the first round, him being able to recompose himself, and then Usman showing us new tricks that he's managed to kind of cultivate training with Trevor Whitman and those guys at Elevation. So what is the, I don't want to kind of angle this question too much, but what is the difference that you saw in an Usman prior to going over to Whitman? Did you see anything?
Well, I think just being more comfortable with his stand up. I think that's something that he's worked on a bit, and also just being a wrestler. Like, who better to learn from a guy whose base is wrestling and has improved their stand up than Trevor Whitman, who did that with Justin Gaethje, right? Like, people always forget and people always trash Gaethje's wrestling, but Gaethje, like, he didn't know you watch his first couple of fights, he didn't strike, he's only wrestling. So that's sort of the same thing here with Usman, where it's like he's known as sort of this wrestler. He sort of got this unfairly sort of moniker of being this boring fighter. Remember the 30% thing that he had like years ago where everyone gave him a hard time for that? I mean, that Usman is long gone. I think we're seeing an evolution there. And I think the biggest thing is just him being more confident in his stand-up. Like, the fact that he even wanted to stand and trade with Burns when he has a clear advantage in the wrestling department tells me that that is something he learned, where the coaches are like, look, you're good, man. If you want to stand and trade with this guy, you'll be fine. And we saw that. And I think another credit has to go to Usman's chin, because Burns knocks out a lot of people. And for Usman to take a shot like that and compose himself, I thought he looked outstanding. So he's a big problem for that division.
So in terms of, obviously, the fight played out the way it played out, and I like yourself, I was impressed by what he showed us on the feet and the way he was able to switch stances. I don't know whether he did that so much against Kobe Covington, because I just can't remember the fight in that much kind of detail. But if he did, was that more of a him adjusting his stance because of leg kicks and things of that nature? But here it was through choice and him showing different angles and different looks to Gilbert to land those jabs. But in terms of just Kamaru Usman as a fighter, or as a personality almost, because obviously there's two sides to the fight game, right? So there's what you do inside the cage and how good you are, and what you're able to earn outside the cage by how good you are, in front of the camera and during interviews and stuff like that. You mentioned something, the 30% comment that he made, and I feel like he's been carrying that around his neck for an unfair amount of time now. What is the feeling that you get in terms of people's perceptions of Kamaru Usman? Do you feel a shift a little bit?
Yeah, I felt like it improved over the weekend for sure. I think there's definitely that talk now of him really being a legit fighter, because again, if had he won sort of a close decision against Burns, kind of like we expect him to beat Masvidal, right? Style wise, it was a bad matchup for Masvidal. Usman was able to capitalize. He won. This fight was more impressive in the sense that we saw that evolution in the striking, like I said, and getting a third round finish over a guy like Gilbert Burns, who's had never been finished. He'd never lost at welterweight, right? I mean, I know he'd been finished at lightweight, but I think that's what sort of got people. Like, I found the chatter from that a little bit more. Although saying that, I mean, that wasn't even the biggest highlight this weekend. I mean, we can get into stuff later, but like, you had the Julian Marquez thing, you had the Anthony Hernandez upset. Like, there were other things that I feel like almost overshadowed Usman a little bit. But saying that, I think his stock's gone up. The problem with Usman, like I've always said, is that he's a great fighter, but I just think that he doesn't do himself any favors with the media. He doesn't do a lot of media, doesn't do a lot of interviews. His management's very sort of strict with that. You'll see that a lot of their top fighters do very limited media, which I get. They're busy, they got things going on, but I think in a sport like the UFC, or in MMA, I should say, in an organization like the UFC, you need to get as much publicity as you can. And I feel like Usman hasn't really captivated the fans that way. Like, you don't see a lot of like, you see a lot of fans who obviously respect Usman as a fighter, but as a personality, I don't think he really took off. Like, when he beat Woodley, I feel like there was a period where he didn't do like any media. No one knew what was going on. And Colby sort of took over, and that shouldn't happen. I mean, Colby wasn't even fighting at that point, and he was more popular than Usman. So I feel like this weekend helped, but I still think in terms of Usman being like a superstar, someone of that magnitude, maybe not like a Conor, but maybe on like an Israel Adesanya scale, I feel like he's not there yet, because his fighting style is definitely doing that, but he's got to do more personality wise. And I feel like he's not really connecting with a lot of fans that way.
Understood. And what's your perception then? Because I'll kind of give you my opinion to let you know what I'm trying to drive at here. So I totally agree with you. I don't feel like he's definitely not on the same level as an Israel Adesanya, who's kind of nearly reaching that kind of top tier of a MMA fighter in terms of popularity and drawing power, right? But Kamaru Usman, he's a guy for me personally that I feel like every time I listen to him speak, it feels like he's keeping it real. Like, he's not playing a character, he's being himself, and he says what he thinks and what he believes, and that message and that story doesn't change. He doesn't flip and flop, and what you see some fighters trying to play a character. Covington can be accused of this, someone that is playing a character where he kind of contradicts himself in certain interview scenarios. He'll say one thing one day and then the next day it'll be something different. And those are the kind of fighters that I gravitate to, like a Kamaru Usman, a person that is, what you see is what you get, effectively, right? So a character like that, that's my perception of him. So I suppose the question is, what's your perception of Kamaru Usman, and do you think he has the ability to reach the next level with his personality?
I do. He almost reminds me a bit of like in some ways, almost like a GSP, very stoic, very, not like really, because GSP was a huge star. I mean, I know this being a Canadian. I mean, that's even today, like GSP is still a huge draw. And he wasn't a trash talker. He wasn't a guy going out there. I mean, he had, I'd say, a bit more personality, but he wasn't going like the Conor McGregor route of like, the one-liners, the quotes that we all know. I mean, he had the one quote, I think, with Matt Hughes where he says, "I'm not impressed," but that's as far as his trash talk gone, which looks so mild in comparison to what like Conor and some of these other fighters have done.
He kind of stammered while he was saying it. Like, it wasn't even.
It's like he felt uncomfortable being like somewhat mean to Matt Hughes, right? So, I think Usman, he potentially could get there, or maybe he doesn't, and that's okay, right? Like, it's very tough to break through sort of that hardcore MMA bubble of where, obviously a lot of the fans respect Usman, they like watching him fight, but to get to that next level of where, like, you're having people talk about you that just aren't, regular MMA fans. That's a tough barrier to break. And I don't know if he can get there. He might be able to, but I just don't know if it's necessarily in his nature. And, it's not even about playing a character. Like with Colby, I feel like it's also worked against him. I mean, I see people making fun of Colby just as much as they are talking about how much they love him. I mean, there's no one more polarizing. Same thing with Chael Sonnen. It's the same sort of thing. Chael used to do that as well. He's like, "I've never been submitted." Well, you've been submitted like 8 times, right? You know what I mean? Like things like that. It's just playing up that character. But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I think in terms of how I feel about Usman, I think he's a great fighter. I think he gives a very good, personable interview, but I don't know what the ceiling is for him as a superstar. I don't know that yet.
Mm-mm. I think obviously both things go hand in hand, isn't it? It's what you do in the octagon, and then how people gravitate towards your performances, how kind of viral a knockout or that moment in the octagon can go, and then how you capitalize off it outside the octagon. So we're yet to see how that can build. But for me, it feels like he's going to be the champion for a considerable amount of time. Personally, I can't really. It's hard to see someone beating him,
Well,
especially.
that's the other thing, and sorry to interrupt you there, is like if you look at like the division right now, like in terms of contenders, right? Like most likely, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, most likely what's going to happen next is he'll fight Masvidal, right? Which
Mhm.
I don't really see that fight going any differently. Jorge Masvidal is not going to all of a sudden become an amazing wrestler, and yes, he'll get a full camp, but I don't think it'll make a difference. I still think Usman wins that fight. I think a Colby rematch would be interesting because despite what people say and not liking Colby, I thought that fight was pretty even going into the fifth.
Yeah.
Colby lost. That's intriguing. But other than that, like Wonder Boy, yeah, he's still got it at his age, but he's a little bit older. You do wonder there if that's going to play a role in one of his fights coming up here. I mean, Jeff Neal is much different than a Kamaru Usman. And then you got Leon Edwards, who just hasn't fought in forever, right? And unfortunately, his fight against Chimaev, like what the UFC was trying to do there was that if had Chimaev won that fight, they were going to give him the title shot, right? No doubt they were going to do that. In fact, Usman wouldn't even be talking about Masvidal if that fight was still booked. But he's on the shelf with COVID. You've got Leon. I don't know where or who he's going to fight next, if he's even going to stay on that card. But that's where things get interesting. And so from kind of to answer your question, like I'm looking at the division right now, it's kind of an older man's division. Like even a guy like Mike Chiesa, like he's in his 30s right now. It's not like you have like someone that's coming up that's like really like blowing through the competition, right? So that's where I agree with you. I don't see anyone beating him for a while. And here's the other kicker: like Usman's not going to move up to 85 either, like an Izzy is to fight like Blachowicz, because I know for a fact, and I've asked Izzy this as well, they'll never fight each other. There's too much respect there. Both fighters from Nigeria, they're not going to go and do that. So I think Usman's options are limited, and I think that's where he's going to run into some problems in terms of superstardom. Is that it might get to that point like a Demetrius Johnson where he's just going to keep winning, but it's not really going to be the type of like it's going to be kind of you're going to expect him to keep winning like this, I think, and it's going to kind of make things a bit monotonous, if that makes sense.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that because actually Tyrone Woodley was someone that used to, I don't want to use the word moan about this very thing, right? Because he was on this win streak and he felt that he deserved a money fight, but there was no one in his division to be a dance partner for him at the time. There was Kobe Covington that was kind of rising up the ranks and doing what he does, and that was kind of the fight that looked like it was going to happen. And then at that time, I think Kamaru Usman that's when Kamaru beat Tyrone Woodley. So it's funny because the welterweight division is actually really exciting in terms of there's a lot of kind of guys in the top 1 to 6 or 7 kind of positions, and Jorge Masvidal and Kobe Covington both do have a certain amount of star power, but whether Kamaru is able to capitalize on that, that's a different conversation, isn't it?
You brought up something interesting that I wanted to touch on was the whole, Woodley and Covington thing, which the UFC totally dropped the ball on that. Like, I get that it's probably tough to book fights and you need to keep the ball rolling. You have to have main events going on. But you remember Woodley fought Darren Till, and they didn't have to do that fight. I mean, Till won a very controversial decision in my eyes, anyways, over Stephen Thompson. And so they give him the shot, and they, some people said he was rushed. I mean, if you technically get a win over Thompson, I don't think you're rushed, but certainly that was a beatdown, and I felt like that was one of Woodley's best performances. But like the height of like Covington and Woodley was at that point, and like I feel like they should have just waited a little bit longer, waited for that fight to happen. Like we got it last year, but it wasn't anything close to what we were going to expect. I mean, they did a great job of two former teammates who don't like each other, and that people forget before Usman and Masvidal and all these other people, Poirier, Colby was talking all about Woodley, and that was the fight that was set up to do. And instead they went with Till, and that kind of ruined things because that took Till as a sort of a chip for them at welterweight, because of course he had to fight Masvidal, and that went on Masvidal's run. And then also Woodley ended up fighting Usman, and then Usman wins, and then he doesn't do any media for months. So it didn't really like help the scenario. So I feel like the UFC in terms of the welterweight division kind of fumbled the ball on that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I actually remember I wrote an article because before I started making videos, I used to write articles that no one read. And I wrote one called The Face Turn of Tyrone Woodley. Because I felt like there was a lot of negative energy towards Tyrone Woodley because he always felt like someone that was always moaning and, oh no, I should be fighting this guy, or I should be getting more money, or I should be getting this. And then because Kobe Covington was just so relentless in his pursuit of Tyrone Woodley, and Tyrone Woodley started, engaging with that, it kind of felt like he was getting some of the love that he was craving for so long, and it kind of came inadvertently, if that makes sense, at that point. And
no, I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. The UFC dropped the ball on that account then. All right, so let's just look at then after post fight. Kamaru Usman, he calls out Jorge Masvidal. And my opinion, I felt like it was a good call out. It wasn't an obvious one about, okay, well, it's the money fight or whatever. He kind of stated who he wants to fight and why he wants to fight him because of the excuses that were already inbuilt in the first fight. And the fact that he feels like those same excuses came to fruition after the fight, and he wants to stop those excuses from being a thing. So the only way to do it is give the guy a full training camp, and I'll beat you again. What did you make of the court? Were you surprised that he called out? Like he called out?
No, I'm kind of torn on this. I'll be honest, because look, I'm never going to be the guy to tell fighters don't make more money. I'm with you there. I'd like all the fighters get paid more. I'd like to see that happen. But from a fan's perspective, I have no interest in seeing that rematch. A full training camp is not going to make a difference. It's a bad style fight for Masvidal. He's not a good wrestler. And even then, like, I know he's been working with like Bo Nickel, who's a former NCAA wrestler who's transitioning to MMA, and I know he's doing some work with American Top Team. I know they've got some good wrestlers at that gym, but I just don't think it makes a difference. Like, I feel as though like people almost like when you look at Masvidal, like I think of Masvidal as more like a volume guy. Like, yes, he has knockout wins, like the Askren win, right? First round finish, fastest knockout in UFC history, but that's typically not a Masvidal fight. Masvidal is more of a guy that's going to, win he reminds me of almost like a Diaz brother. Like the Diaz brothers are not like an Anthony Rumble Johnson where they're going to go out and get like a first round finish. Like Masvidal's not like that. So leading into that first Usman fight, I heard a lot of people saying, well, Masvidal's going to knock him out. Well, really, because Usman's never been knocked out and Masvidal doesn't have a lot of first round finishes outside of Askren, right? So I feel as though it would be different if like Usman was fighting a guy like that had that kind of one punch knockout power, but Masvidal's not like that. So that's where it's like, and Usman's striking is even better now than it was, I think, even when they fought in July last year. So from a fan's perspective, like I don't see that fight going any way outside of Usman, injuring himself or something. Like I love Masvidal. I think he's great. I think his whole personality is interesting, but just from a fan style perspective, I don't see the result being any different. So that's why I'd almost rather see him fight like a Wonder Boy. It's a fresh matchup, or like even a Leon Edwards, who's, won 8 straight fights since their first fight. Or, I mean, I don't know who else would be in the equation. Even Colby, even the Colby rematch would make sense because at least Colby had a close fight with Usman their first time,
and it was
lost in the 5th round. Yeah, and also he has a win in between there over Woodley. Yeah. So at least that makes sense. Whereas Masvidal hasn't fought since that first fight. So that's, look, I know it will sell well. It's Masvidal and Usman, and like I said, Usman get paid, by all means deserve that. But I got to be honest, as a fan, I'm a bit disappointed to see if that does end up happening next.
Here's a bit off topic, but still part of the division.
No, let's hear it. I love it.
So Jorge Masvidal, he's a guy that at one point he was sorry, let me get my words out. Yeah. He fought Nate Diaz for the BMF belt, and I felt like that was the peak of his popularity, right? Mm-hmm. Even after losing to Kamaru Usman, I felt that he didn't lose any popularity or any momentum because of the circumstances in which the fight actually happened, the short notice, all of that stuff. Do you feel like he's over the last few months, and I don't want to get into American politics or whatever.
I know where you're going with this because I actually talked about this morning on my podcast. Listen, I think Masvidal's stock's gone down. 100% it has, with the Trump stuff, say what you want. I know this is not a political show and I'm not making it that, but there are people who sort of turned against Masvidal because of his political views. On top of that, he's not doing much media. And on top of that, he's not he hasn't fought since July of last year. That's a long time. So I think that all those things combined yes, Masvidal's still a star. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that his stock is certainly not what it was at the peak of 2019 when he had beat Nate Diaz. He was at the high, he was the guy. He was the guy of 2019. No one had a better year, especially with considering his 2017, where he'd lost to Wonder Boy and a few of the other fighters. Yep. No one had a better 2019 than Masvidal. But I feel like now a Masvidal fight now just doesn't hold the same amount it did, say, when he fought Nate Diaz.
Yeah, I the reason why I say this is because I kind of, when he knocked out Darren Till in England, obviously being English, I was a bit upset that Darren Till got beat. But at the same time, it was a situation where when Jorge Masvidal got on the mic, I don't know if you remember, and he was like, "Oh, sorry, I knocked your guy out, but I love you English fans and this, that, and the other." And then he done the 2-piece and the soda and all of that stuff, and he went viral and whatnot. I still kind of gravitated towards him as an individual, sort of thing.
Of course, yeah.
And since then, it was the same momentum built. Nate Diaz fight again, I gravitated towards him, and then I kind of felt like he kind of, and it's not to do with the politics even before that. It was a little bit like it felt like he started to believe his own hype, or he's kind of getting a bit big-headed. I just had this kind of sense that he's kind of changing as an individual. I don't know if you got that or if that's just...
No, I did get that sense as well. Yeah. And I know exactly what you mean in terms of, Yeah, I don't know. And it wasn't even just the political stuff as well. I feel
Yeah.
like, there's that whole thing with him and like the, Dominance MMA, their fighters sort of back and forth. I feel like that sort of like some fans liked it, some fans didn't. So there was some stuff sort of in between there, which
Mm,
just kind of, I think sort of killed his stock a little bit. But yeah, it's been interesting. Like I said, I think a Masvidal fight now compared to say when he fought Usman back on Fight Island last year is much different in my
mm,
opinion.
mm.
So
Yeah, I think, and obviously this is just speculation. This is just me kind of looking at the situation and coming up with an answer, which may be completely wrong. I have a feeling that with the UFC, we're obviously trying to make Jorge Masvidal against Covington for tough and them to fight afterwards. I feel like Jorge Masvidal or his management team are negotiating from a standpoint of Jorge Masvidal is a star, the guy that beat Nate
the
Diaz.
same guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. To me, if you're Masvidal, why would you not want to fight Covington? It would be a bigger payday than Usman. I really believe that.
Mm,
Like I do. Like that is, people say Colby's not a draw. I mean, come on. The fact that he's talked about so much and he barely fights now, he's fought a couple times each year. Like that's not enough to keep it going. But because he does these interviews, because he's out there saying this controversial stuff, he's still in the public eye. Like everyone's talking about Colby today because of Submission Radio's interview.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
like more people are talking about Colby than Usman right now, which is crazy. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, Masvidal should have, they should have figured out a way to do tough. That was an easy sell. Two former teammates who legitimately hate each other. Covington leaves American Top Team. Yes, it's not a great matchup for Usman either, or for Masvidal, in the sense that, again, it's another wrestler, but it's still a fresh matchup. And, Usman could, fight the winner. That would have made a lot of sense. Kick your feet back up, Usman. You're going to get the winner of this, tough show or whatever. I don't know if the timing, if it would take too long, but still, that was a slam dunk. Cause like, look, if they end up doing Masvidal and Usman as tough coaches, like I'll watch, but you just almost feel like kind of like when Usman fought Woodley, it was just kind of like, yeah, this is a good fight, but it's like, it's not really what we want.
Yeah, but when Usman fought Woodley, did you go into that fight thinking, "Oh, Usman's going to win this easily"? Because I didn't.
No, I didn't. I thought Woodley was going to win because
Yeah,
if you remember, Woodley was coming off the win over Till before
yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
saw just him look amazing. It's like, okay, this is the fight where Usman's going to lose,
yeah.
and he didn't. He totally beat down. I was at that fight in Vegas,
Oh,
and
you're
he
lucky
just
so and so.
completely beat he beat the brakes off Woodley, and that was the beginning of the decline for Tyron Woodley. It was pretty
Yeah,
crazy. Now thinking where Woodley was after beating Till, which I thought was maybe his best performance in the octagon, to go from that to now where he is now, where he's fighting Vicente Luque for his job essentially. It's crazy to see the downturn in his
yeah,
career.
yeah. Just in a year, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just going back to the Covington and Jorge Masvidal tough scenario. Do, here's my perception. I feel like a little bit like it wasn't just a money based, a decision based solely on money, and I feel like there's so much animosity there between Covington and Jorge Masvidal. There's so much at stake aside from just the money. There's a lot to be said for the bragging rights of whoever wins, and I kind of feel like it speaks to a little bit of the confidence that Jorge Masvidal has going into that fight, that it hasn't been made, because Covington seems very open to fighting Masvidal, and it feels like Masvidal's the guy that doesn't want to take the fight. And I don't know whether there's enough money in the world for him to take that fight. And if that's the case, does that mean that he doesn't necessarily believe he has a strong opportunity to win that fight?
That's possible for sure. I would love to be a fly in the wall to know exactly what's going on there. The other angle, sort of theory that I've heard as well, and it's something I talked about on my podcast this morning with Ashley Yoder, is, is the political stuff. Is that a reason maybe Disney staying away from Covington with the Trump stuff? We live in a different climate now. We saw what happened to Gina Carano last week. Like, is that, having two Trump people, I know Trump's not in office anymore, but you get what I'm saying? Like, you have that there. I know you can edit, but still, are they worried that it's going to be like a headache to have them there? Colby tweets out something dumb during the show or something that's going to get the show like in shambles. So I wonder if that's a role in it as well, but it could be a confidence thing. The one thing I'll say about Masvidal, though, kind of like the Diaz brothers, like he's losing fights, but he's still popular as ever, right? Like, so I don't think I think even if he had lost to Covington, he's still got that Nate Diaz rematch in his back pocket if he wants it. I think there's other options for Masvidal. It's not like a McGregor situation where, like, I think McGregor has got to be like, it looks like he's going to do the trilogy, but he's got to be careful, because if McGregor loses, I think people will still watch him fight, but it's not like it's not the same thing as like a Masvidal, because he's sort of known as this kind of like BMF guy, right? It's a little bit different. I can't explain it, but it's like there's more at stake for like a guy like Connor than say like a Masvidal. If Masvidal loses to Covington, big deal.
It's
You know what I
almost
mean?
like the Nates and the Jorge Masvidals of this world, because they have that persona kind of. I don't want to
I'll
use.
fight anyone. Don't worry about
Yeah,
my record. Like
yeah,
no one, like for example, like Connor will probably go down in MMA history as one of the best fighters, like in terms of what he did, the double champ, all that. Is Masvidal and Nate Diaz going to feel the same way? No, but they're going to be known as exciting guys. I mean, whether they're in the Hall of Fame or not, I have no idea, but they're going to be known as like fan favorites. So they're kind of in a different category, if that makes sense. So that's why I don't think the loss is as big a deal if he lost to Covington, because like, yes, his ego would be hurt, but Masvidal can still fight anyone and people are going to tune in, you know?
That's a fair point. Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from there. So going back to then Covington. So Dana White over the weekend, he was quite vocal about the fact that Khamzat Chimaev is out, but they're looking at trying to secure Covington as a replacement for Leon Edwards. So first and foremost, when you heard Dana White say that, what did you think the chances of that fight actually happening in March were?
10%. Like I just, because here's the thing, like for Leon, it actually makes a lot of sense because Leon's fighting a guy that people know quite well in terms of Covington. And I think it's a winnable fight for Leon. I think Leon's very good. I think he's another guy, unfortunately, that has just not captivated the fans. He's probably one of my favorite people to interview, really insightful. Like he's kind of got this, like kind of like a low key personality, but he's very clever in some of his answers and stuff. And I actually I like talking to him a lot, but yeah, I think that would be a good move for Leon. But for Colby, I mean, it's a risky fight. Like you lose that fight, you've lost your chance of fighting Usman again. It's not a big money fight for Colby, right? Like Leon's colder than ever. He hasn't fought since July of 2019. And in fact, that, his last win over Rafael dos Anjos, he's now at 55. So that win doesn't look as good as it used to. So I think from Colby's end, I think there's not a lot of incentive to take that fight. From Leon's end, it makes sense. And for the UFC to try and force Colby's hand, I see that side of it as well, because it's like, Colby, you got to fight. Like, but then from Colby's side, it's like, hey, I had to fight Robbie Lawler and I had to fight all these other guys when you weren't giving me my title shot. So it's like, I see both sides of it. But yeah, when I heard that, I was like, there's no way Colby's fighting Leon Edwards. That makes no sense.
Yeah, I personally, I feel like Leon Edwards done enough to fight one of those guys now, because even by the statement he made by accepting that Chimaev fight, because that's a fight that, there's so much unknown around Chimaev because we just don't know just how good he is. Similar to what you were talking about with Gilbert Burns, because Gilbert Burns really didn't have that one acid test in the welterweight division before getting the title shot. I know he beat Tyron Woodley, but that's not the same Tyron Woodley that was once a champion, So by Leon Edwards being the guy that steps up and says, all right, I'll fight Chimaev. And Dana White kind of said this, which I found quite funny, because he was removed from the rankings not so long ago for not, doing what they wanted to do. And now all of a sudden he's the guy that accepts any fight. And
shady business, man. I mean, and then I think they tried, I don't know if they denied it, but they were kind of like, oh no, it was just a glitch. But no, of course they took him out to force his hand. It's dirty practices, man. But anyways.
But I was hoping they could do the same with Covington, because I just want to see Leon Edwards mix it up with those guys now.
I do too. I wish, it's in some ways, it's almost unfortunate that Colby's become the superstar, because just him as an actual fighter, like I think people get blinded by how good Colby actually is. Like he's a good fighter and I want to see him fight the best. And I don't want it to be about this payday or whatever. Like I'd love, from like a fan's perspective, taking the business side out of it, I'd love to see Colby and Leon. I think it would be a very interesting fight, but I can see it from Colby's end where it's like, look, I built up this persona. I mean, I get all this hate now. I get all this love. Like, it's like, that needs to be worth something compared to what Leon Edwards brings to the table. So yeah, when I heard that fight, I was like, yeah, it's not happening.
Yeah, just to make a point to what you just said there, one of Kobe Covington tends to drift in and out of character during interviews, and I've heard him say on a few occasions about how he realizes that he's got something because people either love him or hate him. There's nobody that's indifferent towards him in the audiences, and like you say, that's being I assume you're a wrestling fan or used to be a wrestling fan.
Grew up Attitude Era, a little bit of a wrestling fan, kind of went away from it, but that was near and dear to my heart, was the Attitude Era. For sure.
Same here. So that's one thing that I remember hearing them say. You want to hear the crowd booing or cheering. You don't want them just sitting on their hands, do you? So Kobe Covington has managed to achieve that. So just looking at the welterweight division, so there's a couple of things that I want to ask you. So Chimaev and Leon Edwards. So that was intriguing to me. How did you see that fight going?
I had Leon in that fight because I just didn't see enough from Chimaev to say, okay, this guy's ready for a number 3 guy. Like I made an equivalent of this. That's like Khabib a couple fights into his career fighting like Benson Henderson at the time, or like Frankie Edgar at the time. Like who knows how that would have gone. Like I think the UFC was really hedging their bets on that one. And the thing is, they had a backup in the sense that Chimaev fights in 2 weight classes. So let's say he did fight Leon and he lost. It's not a big deal. He can go back up to middleweight. He had to win up there last anyways. They could save that. So I think it was a calculated risk by the UFC. But if Chimaev had won, you get him in this title shot. He's the next Khabib. He's fighting Usman. Like that's a huge money. I can tell you from the numbers, anything Chimaev related. We talked about Masvidal in 2019. Chimaev was the 2020 Masvidal in terms of
Oh,
everyone
really?
talking about this guy. He was everywhere, every clip, every YouTube clip I've seen everywhere. It's like thousands of views. Like this guy is the talk of the town. So I think that I mean, I would have picked Edwards, but not like just based after what I've seen, because I think Edwards is a good fighter. I think it's a case of a guy being maybe a little overrated in Chimaev and a guy who's very underrated in Leon. So I think the two of them coming together would have been interesting. But saying that, how confident was I that Leon was going to win? I go maybe 70%. Like it wasn't like a slam dunk, because you never know. Chimaev does have that kind of it factor, kind of like what McGregor has, where you see guys that are just like, in some ways, like almost afraid to fight them before they step in the cage. Like Chimaev has this sort of imposing thing. So yeah, if I was going to bet on that, I'd have to go with Leon. And he was an underdog too. Why wouldn't I take that plus money?
Was he an underdog?
Yeah, he
Blimey,
was.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize.
Yeah, no, if you look at the odds, I think Leon might have opened as a favorite, but the betting line bet Edward or Chimaev hard. So Chimaev was the betting favorite.
Okay, so last one about the welterweight division. Then I just want to ask you a couple of other things. So map out for me how you see the welterweight division progressing throughout the year and how you want it to. So it might be two different.
Interesting.
things.
Okay, so how I see it progressing throughout the rest of the year, I think you're going to do. So I think you do Usman, and I think they're going to end up doing Usman and Masvidal. So that's, two out of the equation there. I think they might do I think they'll rebook Leon because of the timing. I don't know what his health status is right now, but I think they might end up doing Leon and Chiesa. I just have that feeling.
That's exactly what I've got that same feeling. Yeah.
Because Chiesa's healthy. Otherwise, I'd say you do Wonderboy, but Wonderboy I know is still recovering from injury. I spoke to him a couple weeks ago. So Wonderboy's kind of out of the equation there. Okay. Then after that, I think if the timing works out, I think then you maybe do Burns and Thompson after that. I know that's kind of a weirder matchup. Burns just fought for the title. Wonderboy I know wants, I know Wonderboy wants Edwards, but I think Edwards wants to fight sooner than that. So you do Edwards and Chiesa, you do Thompson and Burns. And then I think Colby might end up having to sit this one out. I don't know. I mean, maybe he comes back. I didn't really think he was going to fight. I didn't think him and Woodley would ever come to fruition, even though Woodley was on the losing streak. I just felt like, timing wise, it wouldn't work out. You've also got Vicente and Woodley and already fighting each other. You've got, Maya out there, same with Magny. So yeah, I think Colby might end up not fighting for a while. I just kind of have that feeling, unless something drastic changes. I kind of feel like this was the fight to make with Masvidal, and I don't think they're going to give him the shot with Usman. I mean, the fact that Usman didn't even mention Covington, I think speaks volumes as well. So that's what I see happening. Now, what should happen? This is what should happen, in my opinion. So I think they should try and find a way to do Masvidal and Covington. I think Usman should fight the winner. I still think you can do Burns and Thompson, unless Edwards wants to wait. Well, no, I don't think Edwards is going to want to wait. So I think Edwards and Chiesa makes sense, even though I kind of get it from Leon's perspective. You're fighting number 6 instead of, say, someone ranked a little bit higher, but he's got to keep fighting. Or maybe they go Edwards and Burns. But again, Burns just fought. So it's like, I don't think he's going to come back and do it. So probably Edwards and Chiesa will end up happening. And then maybe you do, Thompson, Burns. I think kind of what I said is going to happen is actually kind of what, I mean, outside of the Covington Masvidal fight, I think outside of that, I think Usman should fight either the winner, or, I mean, here's the other thing. You could do Usman and Wonderboy. I know people are like, oh, he's just 2 fights removed from his last loss, but I mean, look, let's call it what it is. And I love Anthony Pettis, and I want him to win that $1 million in PFL, but that's about as close to a fluke in a fight as you can get. Thompson was winning the fight. He got caught. It's like when Mousasi fought Uriah Hall, same sort of thing. Like Mousasi's very good.
Yeah, GSP got caught by
Matt Serra. Exactly. It's the same sort of thing, in my opinion. So Thompson's still very good. He had a draw against Woodley. He had one fight where he lost against Woodley, but in general, I think Thompson deserves a shot. Does he deserve it over Leon? It's tough to say. Leon hasn't fought in a while. That's where you could work against him, because he hasn't fought since July 2019, whereas Thompson's fought more often. So I would be fine if Thompson or Edwards got the title shot against Usman, but we'll see what happens. I kind of answered that, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's so many variables and different people. It's you can't just map it out like.
And Chimaev, by the way, I think Chimaev, I think they're going to really take his time and let him get back, but I could see him going to middleweight, because I think that was sort of the idea, was he would fight a highly ranked guy, unless they want to do him in. But see, then does he fight Gilbert Burns? Probably not, because Burns, they're both dominance guys. I can't see them putting them against each other. I don't know. So I kind of have a feeling that I don't know what they do with Chimaev. Maybe he goes to middleweight again. I'm not sure.
I find it strange that Chimaev, when he had those 2 back-to-back fights, he fought at middleweight first, and then the following week he'd fight at welterweight, because you'd assume that you'd do the weight cut first and then fight at middleweight second, sort of thing. So I just found that kind of. to add to the strangeness of fighting in two different weight classes.
But I think that's the whole point, is that it's almost like I think the UFC saw something like, okay, well, this is a guy we can use in both weight classes, because they can like, he'll headline a card. That's how popular he is, right? So you could do it in either welterweight, or there's more options for him. I think it's why they went that route with him. But that's my theory.
Cool. All right. So that's the welterweight division mapped out, but kind of. But
yeah, kind of. We did our best.
It is what it is.
I'd like to see people do a better job. It's pretty difficult trying to match these guys together. So I think we did a great job, man.
Yeah, but I think I'd like to see Covington with Edwards, and it looks like Masvidal and Usman, and the winner of Covington and Edwards.
Yeah, you know what? I guess, yeah, since if you take the kind of the money factor out of it, yeah, I'm with you. Like, I want to see Colby fight. It's better when he's fighting than when he's not. It's always a good build up from an actual like strategic, like from like a stylistic standpoint. I think it would be very interesting to see how that fight would go. So maybe I'll side with you there as well. I wouldn't mind that fight either.
Good stuff. All right. So now we've got a big event coming up in March. We're like 2-3 weeks away, I think we are. We've got 3 title fights on that card. I don't want to take too much of your time now, so let's just run through the each of the fights. I just want to get your feelings, and if you want to give a prediction, feel free. If you don't want to just yet, then obviously that's entirely up to you. So
I'll give you my early prediction. So let's look at it. So we're talking about the 3 title fights, right? So okay, let's start with the bantamweight title fight first. I actually think we're going to see an upset here, because right now Piotr Jan's the favorite. I like Aljamain Sterling. I think this guy does things in fights that are just a little bit unique. And yes, I know he's lost some fights. He lost to Moraes, and he's had a couple, close calls or whatever. But I think Sterling's got like this it factor. And I'm impressed by Jan. I thought his win over Aldo was very legit. I know a lot of people want to say that, oh, Aldo was in the fight and then, Jan took over, and maybe it's his age or whatever. But you still see Aldo winning fights. So it's not like that's a good win for Jan. I know people point to the Jimmy Rivera fight, which is a bit closer, but even then, Rivera's still getting wins. I think Sterling, with his wrestling, with his grappling, and just his size for that division, I think he pulls off the upset. Does he finish him? Tough to say, but I think he ends up getting it done. So I'm taking Sterling for the upset there. Anderson and Nunes. Obviously, I'm taking Nunes, but I will say this: I think this fight's a lot more closer than people are giving him credit for, because of the style matchup. Yes, and I'll explain why. Because, like, here's the thing: when you have a fighter like Nunes, who, is good everywhere. I mean, Nunes, if she really wanted to, she could just take this to the ground and it'd be game over, right? But I kind of have the feeling that Nunes is like, I'm the GOAT and I can do whatever I want in this fight. Well, I think that's a mistake, because Anderson's only way to win this fight is if he knocks her out, but it could happen. Like, for example, I think this is and I know this isn't going to make sense with MMA math, but I think this fight's going to be closer than Felicia Spencer and Nunes, because of the fact that Anderson's a striker and she's a true featherweight. I mean, Spencer was as well, but Anderson's got good striking. So that's where it comes interesting. She could clip Nunes. We never know. Like, I didn't expect Nunes to knock out Chris Cyborg. She did that in that fight, right? So that's what I mean. Like, I think with Anderson, she's got a puncher's chance, right? It's like when Dan Henderson rematched Bisping. You always knew that H-bomb was there if you wanted to, pull off the win. So I kind of see the same thing here with Anderson. Obviously, I'm taking Nunes. I think no one beats Nunes right now. I think the closest thing to beating Nunes would be Valentina Shevchenko if they had a trilogy. So I'll take Nunes, but I think it'll be maybe a bit later. But I think Anderson will look better than people think, in my opinion. And then main event, close fight. And I hate doing this because I've counted this guy out a lot, but I like Adesanya over Blachowicz. Blachowicz is very good, still very dangerous. He just had a kid. Maybe it'll be like a dad Cerrone in this fight. You never know. But I just think with Adesanya's mobility and movement and his precision, I think he's going to be a little bit faster than, say, like a Dominic Reyes or whatever. Now, Blachowicz could absolutely win this fight. We've seen it before. We've seen Izzy get rocked before. Kelvin Gastelum rocked him. Now you're going up a weight class, fighting a guy who's got even more power than Jan Blachowicz. Yeah, it's a scary thought, but I think Adesanya is a lot younger, a lot more mobile, has yet to lose a fight in martial arts. I know he's been knocked out in kickboxing, but I think Adesanya is going to pull this one off. I think he knew when he was going up, he saw an opportunity similar to when GSP saw the opportunity to fight Bisping. He saw an area where he could win, so that's why he's moving up. So I'm taking Adesanya in the main event. So to reiterate, Adesanya, Nunes, and Sterling. Those are my picks.
Those are my same picks. I just want to make a couple of quick points. So with Jan and Sterling, I feel like Sterling's actually fought the tougher competition.
100%. Yeah, that's another factor too.
And I feel like we're judging Sterling for his losses against more difficult fights at a younger age, whereas Jan's had a easier road to that title. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Sterling gets it done, and I think he's very deserving of it. I think he's worked hard. I think he's had his difficulties. Even getting this fight booked took absolute ages for some reason, and I know it got rebooked because Jan.
It was a visa issue or some. It was some. I can't actually. I interviewed Jan and asked him about this. I think it was something about it was a visa issue of him getting over here to take the fight for, because it was in Vegas, right? So that was the problem, and he wasn't going to get like. And I think the restrictions as well, because that's the thing. So Jan for this camp is an American top team because Tiger Muay Thai is closed, or it was tough with the pandemic. So that's why he's finally getting a proper camp. Which, you know what, credit to him. He's like, I'm not taking Sterling lightly. I need a good camp for this. So.
But what I was referring to is the fact that it was almost, it took ages for Dana White to admit that Sterling was the #1 contender for the title. I don't know if you
so okay. So my theory on that is they wanted Marlon Moraes to beat Sandhagen, so they were going to leapfrog him. Yeah, you're right. You're 100%
right. Yeah, but that took ages, and I feel like he got a bit mistreated.
He absolutely got screwed over because I mean, and again, you know, I talked about the management, their dominance. They pull some politics in the back door. I mean, look at Cody Garbrandt was going to be fighting Figueroa without having a single fight at flyweight. Like, there's some maneuvering behind the scenes there, and I think Moraes is another dominance client. I think that was part of it as well.
So do you think dominance are the dominant management brand? Excuse the pun.
Well, they have a lot of great fighters. I mean, there's no denying that. I think but then also they rep like how many fighters, and I think them and Iridium have like the most fighters on the roster.
Who's Iridium?
So Iridium, they manage like who do they manage? Like not like any like champions, but like Korean Zombie. They manage like Eric Anders, Ashley Yoder, Julian Marquez.
It's like kind of mid kind of level guys.
Yeah, like a lot of like I'm trying to think of some of their bigger names that they have on the roster. Like Zombie's probably the biggest one. Brandon Moreno as well. They rep him. So it's like a handful of like, you know, guys that you've heard of that are like pretty good. But they have a lot. Like, I think even on this card this weekend, they have a couple fighters that are like from the same management, like fighting each other or like close to it or something, you know. So.
And just my final point on the card in March, I'm exactly the same as you. I always pick against Blachowicz, but I always say, but he's a very able fighter. He's a solid fighter, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if he wins. And he always wins, and I'm never surprised. But I can never pick him, even against I forget the guy he beat now.
Dominic Reyes.
Yeah, even against Reyes, I picked against him. But then when the fight played out, I thought to myself, oh, that makes perfect sense. But he's just got that kind of persona where you just think he's just not good enough. But I think he's better than he looks, if that makes sense.
100%. And I think the age is always a cross. The other thing is he got knocked out by Thiago Santos like 3 fights ago. Like people like, you know, and then I thought Rockhold was going to beat him. That didn't happen. Rockhold's chin apparently is still bad at 205. So it's one of those things where, I mean, it's, and by the way, one thing we didn't mention is Glover being the backup. Great call by the UFC here. Glover deserves it. That's a cool story of him.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Turning things around. Yeah, so he's the backup for this fight. Now, here's the thing, though. If Blachowicz is out, is he and Glover going to fight? Like, I guess they could do it, but you know, it would have to be for an interim title, I would think. I don't know.
But would he fight for an interim title? Because that wouldn't mean he's
the backup. So I'm assuming that's for both fighters. I would think it's not just for one or the other. So I don't know. But here's the thing with Adesanya, like I said, with Chimaev, like Adesanya loses at 205. Who cares? He's still the middleweight champ, right? So Adesanya's got a lot going into this.
Yeah. I just think you got a card with bloody 3 title fights on. If someone falls out of that main event, then you don't necessarily need to replace anyone. Just have a 2.
Saying that though, like you take away Izzy and let's say Izzy's the one who's out and you have Blachowicz. I mean, well, Izzy definitely adds a lot to this, but that's why they did 3 title fights. A lot of people are like, why would they stack the card this way? Because a Nunes Anderson card, unfortunately, is not a big seller because I don't know many outside of Glory MMA who are picking Megan to win that fight. On top of that, Jan and Sterling, like Sterling's done a great job of building himself up. Jan's getting there. I like how he's learning English. The last interview we did, a lot of English in that interview. That's great, but he's not at that level yet to headline a pay-per-view. So I think that's why it's like a supporting cast. It's like what they used to do with Demetrius Johnson, where they'd put him on a card with like another notable name or something to kind of give it a boost, right? So
I think I'm looking at it through the lens of me and there's a term in England around boxing when there's 2 kind of guys that aren't necessarily the best known, but it's an exciting matchup on paper, which is a trade fight, which is what I'd class Jan and Sterling as. But that's what I'm really excited about. I'd even say more so than the Adesanya Blachowicz fight. Obviously, I want to watch all of them, but the Yarn and Sterling fight. That's the one that I'm most looking forward to on that card. But yeah, on that note, James, feel free, shout out whatever it is that's your podcast. Who do you actually work for? Because
I work for like 12 outlets. Here's the easier thing to do. I'll just tell you my social media, because I do work for like 12 outlets. I host a couple podcasts. I host a podcast with Chris Cyborg. I host a podcast with Nick and Nate Diaz's manager. I host a podcast with MMA Gold head coach Jim West. So I got a lot going on. Plus I got my own podcast. I'm a busy guy, but easiest thing to do, follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. I post all my content on my social media, so you'll see it there. And I also have my own personal YouTube channel, which is where I do the podcast and the Q&A every week. But I also have my pros picks videos. I have my interviews I put in playlists. So if you subscribe to the channel and you look on the playlist, you'll see all my interviews in there. I put them in playlists because like I said, the way I kind of do this full time is outlets sort of pay me for my interviews. So they own the content, but I can put it on my channel as a playlist. Okay. So they're still making the money on it. So yeah, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. It's an easy way to do it. That's LYNCH. And thanks for having me on, man. This was a lot of fun. I like how we took a different angle with, just not just previewing the, Saturday's card, but talking about the division, because it is very interesting right now, especially what happened on Saturday night.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining me, James. And before we go, please do subscribe to my channel, The Battle Camp, what you're watching this video on. Also, if you do prefer listening on podcast format, everything's in the description below. So all the links to my podcast are there. James is also going to subscribe to my channel now as well. So you guys make sure you do it too. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.